Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Thank you for joining us, whether you're listening on digital radio such as Dark Matter Digital Network or Deep Talk Radio or Alien Dreams. You're all welcome, and welcome to new listeners. This is like a traveling broadcast podcast. We travel around the world. We've got people in different locations such as Portugal, Kazakhstan. I'm in Thailand, and we're often changing location, sometimes link our shows to the location. Check out some of our past episodes on YouTube. You can find us at Truth Sentinel with Scott if you just type that in. There's 2 channels. Try to find the one with the most subscribers. That's where I upload the videos. Also check out www.truthsentinel.co.uk. There's over 60 episodes to choose from, ranging from human head transplants to honor killings to drones and all sorts of things. Basically, on the website you'll find a chat room where you can leave articles of your own, or you can comment on things about the show. There's also a voicemail where you can leave a voicemail. We can put it on the show, and you'll find past episodes there, and Twitter feeds, and ways to connect with us. We'd love to connect with you. There's also, of course, a donations button. We'd really do appreciate any donations. Really need to buy some new equipment soon. And you can buy some t-shirts as well. We've teamed up with trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com. And if you buy a t-shirt from them, we get a very, very small donation, but it all helps. You need to use the code TRUTH1. That's TRUTH1. Okay, so check them out, trutht-shirts.com. And today we're going to talk about terrorism, politics, political correctness, superpowers, and Nazis. So we're going to go and talk to Phil, who's in Portugal, Phil Gardner, and also we're going to speak to our resident researcher, Anthony Kay, who's in Kazakhstan, Almaty, Kazakhstan. Let's go over to them now. So, hello, Anthony and Phil. Nice to chat to you again. We had a few technical issues there, as usual, but we've sorted them out, and we're raring to go, aren't we?
Yeah.
We are. Hi, Scott. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, so Phil, you're over in Portugal, right?
Yes, yeah.
Whereabouts are you without giving away your exact location?
I'm right in the north, like on the border with Spain. I'm on the other side of the Minho River, which separates the northwest of Spain and the north Portugal. So I'm on the south side of this river, which is the border.
Okay, great. And Anthony, you're still over there in Almaty. I always introduce you as like at the origins of the foothills of the Himalayas. That's not technically true, is it, though? It's just a bit of artistic license.
Well, it's a bit debatable. Almaty is at the foothills of a large mountain range called the Zaliski Alatau, which does seem to connect to the Tian Shan, and the Tian Shan is part of the Himalayas. It's the foothills of the Himalayas. So I'm at the base of the foothills of the foothills of the Himalayas.
I'll try to remember to say that next time. Anyway, nice to have you both again, and we're going to talk about some news articles that we've come across, and we're going to start with Phil. And all I know about this topic is that it's about superpowers, which is always interesting.
Yeah, so it's not really a news topic. It was just an article that I came across in some magazine. I can't remember where it was, and I started getting interested in what kind of superpowers human beings really do have. So I thought I'd start this off by asking you guys, like, what kind of powers do you think are realistic in today's world?
What kind of powers are realistic? Well, I mean, I think there are quite a lot of things which probably would have been well beyond our reach, say 50 or 100 years ago, which may be within reach in the not too distant future. You know, things like for example, people have long been fascinated with the power that other animals have to jump long distances. You know, like there's the comparison, for example, between humans and fleas. You know, if we had back legs as powerful as fleas' back legs, we could jump over the Eiffel Tower, that kind of thing. So I wonder if there might be plans afoot to enhance that area of human physiology. I don't know. It would be interesting to know.
I didn't find anyone who could jump over the Eiffel Tower, or not yet, anyway.
Okay.
But
Right.
I'm still searching. I'm still open to that. What about you, Scott? Any kind of ideas of sort of examples that you might thought be real?
Well, when I think of superpowers like that do exist, I think of like some of some people who've pushed themselves to the limits, like, Olympians, there's almost like having a superpower, if you can run 100 meters under 10 seconds, well, it's kind of a superpower if you compare yourself to someone who can't. And also things like, the guy who I saw who cycled up one of the tallest building in the world. So he cycled up the staircase. To me, that's a superpower. I cannot imagine having the mental capability, because I believe that a lot of supreme strength and advanced sporting techniques comes down to mental techniques, really, like to have the mental capability to withstand the pain of doing that. I wouldn't want to do it personally, but I guess I think of people who do amazing feats, who are at the top of, in the Guinness Book of Records and things like that.
But to have that sort of strength of will, I guess, is that's quite a superpower in itself.
There's also, mind powers. I mean, these people with incredible memories, photographic memories, who can, like fly over a city once and then draw a schematic map of it, that I think counts as a superpower.
So actually, that is one of the superpowers I've got written down here, and one of the guys is Stephen Wiltshire. And he has the ability to look at any subject just once and create a drawing of that subject in full detail. And Wiltshire was able to accurately recreate New York City after a brief helicopter ride above it, which I thought was amazing. And you saw the picture of him standing in front of his own artwork, which is a huge, a very, very wide piece of paper, of white blank paper. And he's basically totally accurately portrayed the skyline of New York City, which I just think is incredible, because that includes every single window, every single little detail of all the skyscrapers and the buildings in that skyline, which was amazing. Yeah.
That is pretty amazing.
So a couple of other ones. I've got Daniel Browning Smith, and he's been named the most flexible man alive, and he's flexible enough to dislocate his arms in order to fit through an unstrung tennis racket.
Wow.
When would that ever be useful, though?
I guess I was trying to think about this, and I thought if you were locked in a prison cell, for example, and you have those little windows in the prison door, he could fit through one of those prison windows, where they pass the food through and things like that.
No,
I thought that would be quite cool.
I wondered about the tennis racket. When would that actually be useful, being able to fit through a tennis racket?
Yeah, I'm not really sure it would be, unless you were the ball in someone's kind of weird game of tennis. It might be handy. Anyway, we've got another guy called Rathakrishnan Velu from Malaysia, and he's able to pull weights of over 200 tons just using his teeth. 200 tons is quite a lot. That's the same weight as a locomotive engine, and he claims he obtained this amazing talent when an Indian guru taught him to channel all his power to one single part of his body when he was 14 years old. And there is actually a photo of him pulling a train engine just with his teeth. There's a Hai Ngoc, who I think is from Vietnam, and he hasn't slept since he got flu in 1973. Now, this just reminded me of a topic you were talking about a few weeks ago, Anthony, about the sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
And amazingly, he continues to function absolutely normally, and the lack of sleep seems to have no impact on his day-to-day activities, which I find quite extraordinary.
My guess there would be that his body has found another way to manufacture serotonin, which is the chemical that we need to regulate various bodily functions, and usually it's manufactured as we sleep. So if you can find an alternative way to do it, then sleep becomes far less important. But it's fascinating. There were rumors of experiments done by the US government on this in the 70s, I believe it was. But as far as I know, they didn't get very far. It just wasn't a happening thing,
But I find it amazing because it just shows the capabilities of the human body. And it's not like we can just through our own will control our body suddenly and suddenly start producing serotonin or other chemicals that will enable us to have these amazing powers. But the body is capable of doing these things, and kind of has this sort of evolutionary transformation ability, it seems, that are perhaps hidden away in kind of dormant DNA or something like that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, these are, in a sense, you could say these are some of the things you mentioned are a bit like mutations, and most mutations are neither helpful or harmful, and they just pass and nothing comes of them. Yeah. Sounds like some of these abilities may be something like that, but if so, then you're right. It illustrates just what we are capable of and what we might become.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there's some dormant superpowers in us all. Like we have the ability to do a schematic diagram of things we see. We just haven't tapped into it.
Yeah. Here are a couple of examples of that, which might be people's attempts at trying to tap into those dormant capabilities. One of them is the Garth monks from Tibet. This is quite a well-known story nowadays, but in the 70s, when Western scientists started researching this phenomenon, it wasn't heard of at all. And these monks have the ability to change their body temperature using only their minds. And they've been recorded to have changed their temperature by 8 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like much, but a 1 degree change in body temperature for a normal person is usually enough to actually to create serious illness and sometimes death. So 8 degrees is a huge amount for your actual internal body temperature. And these monks have been recorded actually sitting in very, very cold stone rooms, and this is up in the mountains of the Himalayas, and actually drying on their naked bodies wet sheets that have been placed around their bodies, which is pretty phenomenal. I think that's kind of one good example of where people have managed to tap into kind of hidden capabilities. Another guy, Ben Underwood, lost his eyesight through cancer at the young age of 3. And Ben is able to make clicking sounds, kind of like a bat almost, using his mouth. He judges the echo produced to understand his surroundings and any obstacles in his path. And this unique ability allows Ben to walk around without any assistance, without a cane or anything like that, to even ride his bike and have other normal childhood experiences. So that's quite an amazing one for me. I kind of thought that was incredible. Then we've got Wim Hof, who climbed Mount Everest in nothing but a pair of bicycle shorts. And basically, this is a guy who doesn't seem to be affected by cold in any way whatsoever. So the temperatures on Mount Everest can vary between minus 35 degrees Celsius and minus 60 degrees. And these are the temperatures where any other human would have been killed in minutes without the correct protection. So this guy is like impervious to cold, which is quite a cool superpower, I think.
I've heard of him, yeah. I think I've heard him doing some other feats which just defied explanation.
Yeah. We've got Tim Cridland, who is the man that feels no pain. And he's used his ability for kind of shock entertainment by pushing needles and skewers through various parts of his body.
Don't you reckon he might actually go backstage afterwards and start screaming in pain? It's all just a big act.
I don't reckon. We've got Kevin Richardson, who has become so close to wild animals that he can sit around lions, cheetahs and hyenas, and they kind of treat him as one of their own, which I also thought is not necessarily a superpower, but I think is a pretty cool kind of ability. And then the last one is Isao Maki from Japan, he's basically a samurai swordsman, I guess, and he has the ability to process his surroundings in a very different way to normal humans. And rather than seeing an item move through the air, he can anticipate the exact location of the item at any moment with incredible accuracy. So he uses this talent to kind of chop items out of the air using his katana or sword for people's entertainment. And he's been seen kind of cutting through airsoft pellets which are fired directly at him. And those pellets travel at a speed of 550 feet per second. So I think that's pretty cool. That's as close as you can get to kind of using a sword to cut through bullets, as you see on some sort of action movies in the last sort of couple of decades.
So we need to get these people together and establish like a League of Justice with a Justice Hall.
That would be very cool. Yeah, yeah.
Get them onto ISIS. Yeah.
All these people are making me feel quite inadequate at the moment.
The last two things I wanted to concentrate on were Liu Tos Lin. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but this guy I think is also from Vietnam or somewhere in Southeast Asia. And
this is Magnet Guy, right?
This is Magnet Guy, yeah. So he can literally magnetize his body so that any metal will actually stick to his body. And this is kind of using the power of Qi. So Qi is universal life energy. And there are a lot of instances of people recording things that people have done with their Qi force or their Qi power, and different Buddhist meditation techniques and kind of martial arts techniques and things like this. And I've even seen on videos, you can find these on YouTube, of people starting fires with their hands, with nothing but their bare hands, just using punching up pieces of paper and things like that. Yeah. So yeah, there you have it, some real life superpowers.
You mentioned cheaters earlier, though. Couldn't there be a couple of cheaters amongst this bunch of people, though, that are actually they're tricking? They're like the guy with the fire. I remember there was a documentary, and they were following him around trying to find out whether he was cheating. I think they concluded they couldn't see how he was doing it, but there could be some people who are charlatans.
I'm sure.
Scott, I think you've picked up a little bit of Witzelsucht, the disorder that we talked about last time, where people are become addicted to making puns.
Yeah, very, very bad puns.
I think you might have been affected.
So I haven't picked up any superpowers. I've just picked up a disorder. That's not fair.
I don't know. The use of puns, if you make enough bad ones, it could be a superpower. Could be considered one.
Thanks, Phil. You're trying to cheer me up, but it's not working.
You said you did feel a bit inadequate. So we'd call you, I don't know what your superpower name would be there, but I'll think of one.
Thanks.
The thing with the schematic drawing superpower is that, as you said, Scott, there is this potential, or that it's been argued or theorized that there is this potential in the human mind, because we do actually, all of us, pick up a lot more cues from our environments than we consciously register. And so in a way, like being able to fly over a city and then draw it, it requires two things. First, you have to be able to draw, but secondly, I think you would have to be able to like unblock those filters which prevent us from consciously registering all the stuff that we're subconsciously taking in. And in that sense, that sort of makes it seem a little bit more achievable. Because there are many, we know many techniques to train ourselves to become more observant and to kind of, unleash the subconscious to an extent. So I don't know, Scott, there may be hope.
Don't you think it could also be annoying? It could, we think of it as a gift, but that guy who draws the schematics, he probably gets asked to do them every day, and he's like, oh, not again, please, just leave me alone,
Yeah. It's like the old thing about like, being able to hear people's thoughts, which sounds kind of cool until, if it actually happened to you, you'd just be so sick of it within a couple of hours.
Drive you crazy.
Have any friends left because you'd know exactly what they thought of you all the time.
Yeah.
There's a few cases of people who can remember every single day of their life. They can remember what they did precisely to the date. I don't know if I'd want that. I don't know if I'd actually want that. I think sometimes it's good to forget things. I think we mentioned that in another show as well.
Yeah. There's the savant. What's his name? He's a savant and he has an incredible memory. Kim Peek, that's the guy, I think. And he was able to remember everything. He had a truly photographic memory. And yeah, it was exceptional. And I think he enjoyed it in some ways. But I think it was a burden at times.
Yeah, it would be.
He was the guy on whom the Rain Man was very, very loosely based.
So autistic, yeah?
Yeah.
There were a couple of others. I don't remember their names, but Scott, you mentioned about these. You sort of thought it was a fairly sort of a superpower to be pushing your body to the limits physically, kind of athletically. And there was one guy, like I said, I can't remember his name, but he's an American, and he can basically run without needing any rest. So he ran 50 marathons in 50 days, which most kind of sort of sports psychologists and sports trainers and so on just said it was impossible. But this guy actually did it. Ran 50 marathons in 50 days.
I know there is an event though, an Ironman event, which is similar to that. Maybe it's not 50 days. But it's at least sort of maybe 20 days. They do the marathon every day. So there are some people who can do that as well.
Yeah. But this guy is kind of way ahead of the pack,
Literally.
basically.
Yeah.
And yes. And he was running. I don't remember the figures on this either, but I will find this out actually. But he was running on a treadmill. Scientists kind of wanted to study his body, actually, study his metabolism and so on. And he was running on a treadmill for several days, basically, and I think it added up to something like 350 miles without stopping, continuous running, and I thought that was pretty incredible. So the kind of caption under this guy was he could basically run as long as his body was kept hydrated and he kept getting some carbohydrates. He could just continue running without ever actually stopping, and possibly needing some sleep at some point. But yeah, and so he's a good example of that kind of superpower. And then there were other people who men and women who, Anthony, this was more your kind of the powers of the mind thing, who could demonstrate some amazing abilities, and several of them were about memory. Like you say, and a lot of it seems to be about memory recall. It seems that the mind is always taking in stuff, so that you have these memories of things somewhere in your being, but it's the ability to recall all of those memories in the right kind of order and sequence as well, that you need that information. Some of them have shown amazing sort of recall powers, and then people with just abilities to work out problems, to solve very, very complicated mathematical problems, for example, in their heads without the need for any papers, computers, or even time to, long periods of time to work things out, work out equations and so on. And I thought those were pretty amazing sort of superpowers.
They definitely are, yeah.
Well, I mean, as well as superpowers, there were people in the past who believed they belonged to a super race. I'm talking, of course, the Nazis, who we always seem to come back to. And I think you're gonna mention them again, aren't you, Anthony?
That's right. The old Nazis have been in the news a bit lately, and I think this is always interesting, especially since they're part of the Truth Sentinel drinking game. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with this game. We started it a while ago. Basically, anytime Scott says, yes, indeed, you should drink. anytime I say, actually, there's some research on this, you should drink. And anytime someone says, it all goes back to the Nazis, any listener playing the game can take a drink. So yeah, I've been reading a little bit about a few stories connected to the Nazis this week, and one of them really fascinated me. It appeared on a website called Messy Nessie Chic, which I invite you to check out. It's quite interesting. But basically, the story is about a youth group in 1930s Germany who the Gestapo used to call the Edelweiss Pirates, right? We know that youth groups were a major tool of indoctrination for the Nazis, and they were elsewhere as well, and still are in some places. If you look at, the Nazi movement in Russia, for example, it's a little scary. But these guys were quite different in that they weren't so much organized from a central authority. They just sort of naturally sprang up on their own, and they were fiercely anti-authoritarian. And they basically did all the things that young people in Germany were being conditioned not to do at that time. They hung out together on street corners. They listened to jazz music. And, like Nazis had tried to ban jazz music, it was considered degenerate music because so much of it was made by Jewish people and black people. They wore like snappy American-style clothing. They flirted on the streets. The girls wore their hair long instead of like in neat little Aryan braids. These guys, they just used to pick up their guitars and head off into the forest together, to have like weekends of drinking and carousing and quote-unquote free love. And they also had local chapters with kind of cool names like Fahrenstänzer or Traveling Dudes. So pretty much these were the kind of seriously cool, seriously rebellious kids. Yeah? But they also tried to make themselves as much of a pain to the authorities as possible. They used to tag railway stations with anti-Nazi messages like medals for murder and down with Hitler. And they took on the Hitler Youth directly. In fact, one slogan of the Traveling Dudes was eternal war on the Hitler Youth. So you had this kind of ongoing battle. Like Hitler Youth details would go after the Edelweiss pirates, and they would like break up their meetings in the forest violently. But then the pirates would strike back. You know, they would ambush Hitler Youth patrols and just beat the daylights out of them, and then kind of, you know, proudly announce that they'd done so. They also got involved in some more serious stuff later on. They derailed a couple of freight trains to stop government supplies, and they even had a plan to blow up the Nazi headquarters in Cologne. But the amazing thing about this, I think, is that it comes from recently uncovered Gestapo documents, because the Gestapo considered these guys quite a serious threat. And one of their files had over 3,000 names in it just from the Cologne area. So if you do the math on that, you actually find it makes these Edelweiss pirates the largest resistance group in Nazi Germany, like far larger than any adult resistance groups. And they were aged from 12 to 17. So, yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting little footnote to history, which we don't really hear about. I mean, I'd never heard of this group before. Had either of you guys come across them?
No, I haven't. I've never heard of them at all. It just shows you teens aren't all bad, are they?
They certainly aren't.
No, I hadn't heard of it either. But I had read some time ago about how many young boys and girls were taken from different countries that the Nazis had already occupied. So Poland especially, a lot of people, a lot of young kids were taken from Poland and taken away from their parents, whether their parents were dead or alive, and sent to kind of special, kind of sorting centres, I guess you would call them. And they were given examinations by doctors, and basically if they showed all of the characteristics or some of the characteristics of the kind of stereotypical Aryan race, then they were brought into Nazi Germany and sent to live with an already German family. And so some of them sort of fitted in absolutely fine, but a lot of them obviously missed their parents and missed their homes, and it created all of these sort of rebellious feelings amongst these young kids, and basically they're being kind of ripped away from what they know, from everything they know, and brought into the country of their occupiers. So the conquerors who have taken over their own homeland have sort of ripped them from the arms of their families and basically kidnapped them and tried to turn them into like what Anthony was saying, you know, the Hitler Youth, and I think a lot of them sort of didn't really go along with this. They saw what the Nazis stood for, at least, and even though that they were brought up for the rest of their lives with a German or a Nazi family, they would kind of see what was wrong with everything in Nazi Germany and kind of rebel against it. So maybe some of the Edelweiss pirates were some of these kids who had been, you know, taken from their homes.
They could well be, and that in turn reminds me of a story that I read a long time ago when I was reading a book about the Weimar Republic, which immediately preceded Hitler's Third Reich. During the Third Reich, there were a lot of young women from Czech and Polish families who were sort of designated as like house servants for Nazi officers in the field in their countries. So the Nazi officer would move into a local house, family would be kicked out, but the young girl would remain, or another one would be brought in. And what actually happened was, en masse, these German officers, most of whom are quite young and single, would fall madly in love with these beautiful Slavic housemaids and marry them. But they did this in large enough numbers that, again, there were official files created on what are we going to do about this problem where all of our officers are falling in love with Polish girls and Czech girls. So, you know, it's a kind of threatening the whole kind of veneer of, you know, like we're a superior race, etc., because they just met these girls and went, wow, she's amazing. So I thought it was quite a touching story.
It made me wonder whether, like, you can force an ideology upon children, like what Phil was saying about taking people from another country and then trying to turn them into the Hitler Youth. It made me think of an ISIS story that I came across about schools where ISIS are trying to sort of raise these children to believe in the same ideology as themselves. And I think to a certain extent it probably works from a young age, but as people get older and they start to question things more, maybe there's a glimmer of hope that they might realize that it's not really the right way to go.
Well, there may be, but the other interesting thing about what you've just brought up is when we talk about the Nazis, which it all goes back to, drink now.
Indeed.
When we talk about the Nazis, it sounds like, kind of a bit of a historical curiosity in a way, because we're talking about things that happened, 75, 80 years ago. But these things are still happening, There are so many parallels to be drawn. I mean, some people draw these parallels irresponsibly. There's a kind of right-leaning politicians who they don't like, so they immediately kind of make the Nazi metaphor in very clumsy ways. But there are parallels. I'll give you another example, another story that's cropped up recently in the news. About 18 months ago, there was a book published called The Führer at Home, and it was about how Hitler's image was remade in the 1930s. Now, we know a lot about that process, of giving him a kind of radical personality makeover. And part of the reason why we know about it is because this kind of model of image manufacturing for our political leaders has largely been the Western model ever since. I mean, even when, image makers today don't know they're doing it, they're actually using techniques which the Nazis largely pioneered for Hitler. And so, when you see someone like, say, George W. Bush, he always used to hold these supposed impromptu press conferences at his ranch with his dogs. That's a carefully staged, managed moment, of course. But remarkably, that specific context, the idea of putting the leader kind of off-grid in nature and putting him with his dogs, that one comes specifically from the playbook of Hitler's image makers. So this book concentrated on two particular parts of the Hitler image. One was the fact that his handlers were really keen on him being seen with children, which is the case for most politicians, but also with animals. So there were lots and lots of photos of Hitler walking in the mountains with his German shepherds and feeding deer near his chalet in Bavaria, and it was all to feed the public these fantasies about how he was this sort of human embodiment of a national ideal. That this article in the International Policy Digest put it as an ideal domestic life rooted in the natural landscape, with blonde children frolicking in the mountain air and so on. And so basically they were saying to the German people, you can have this ideal at the cost of giving up just a few of your freedoms and paying more taxes to fund all these monumental projects that the Nazis were undertaking, the Autobahns and so on, which were ironically about as far from clean mountain air and natural living as you could possibly get. But one interesting outcome of all this was that other Western countries fell for the makeover, especially the USA. There was even a dog fancying magazine that made him like an honorary member because he was so devoted to his dogs. and then the other thing this book focuses on, which might be a little bit of a surprise, is interior design. There was a designer called Gerdy Trust, who was Hitler's personal interior decorator, and she was considered a key figure by the Ministry of Propaganda. So she and Hitler together did the interior of his chalet, the Berghof, and that's where he usually went to pose for all these photos, to entertain Western journalists, and also, by the way, to make some of the big decisions that led to millions of executions. But they, Trust and Hitler together, sat down and really worked out the Berghof's decor in detail, and they delved into German literature, especially from the Romantic period, and they tried to make this house kind of embody this classic imagery, because the goal was that Hitler should be almost a kind of mystic leader, someone who immersed himself in nature and was almost a kind of natural force in himself. And so the thing is, the Americans and the British went nuts for the Berghof and for any pictures they could get hold of Hitler in the Berghof. The 1920s and the 1930s were kind of the time when, you know, the cult of celebrity was born, and they wanted to know every detail of his home life. So you had these surreal things happening, like, for example, in May 1937, the Luftwaffe bombed Guernica in Spain, and they killed thousands of people. And then a month later, the New York Times magazine printed this kind of front page spread showing Hitler's Berghof and rambling about his generous hospitality and his connection to nature and so on. And that kind of thing happened all over and over again, you know, right up until the invasion of Poland. He was appearing all the time in British and American lifestyle magazines. Life magazine was in on it, Vogue was in on it, and they were all kind of, you know, lauding him for his wonderful home and what it said about his character as a statesman. So it was all very disturbing. But again, like, this is where we shouldn't forget this kind of stuff, because looking back now, 80 years later, it seems distant, except that it still happens. And you can think of many examples. I mean, one of them is obviously Putin with his various stunts with animals, you know. I don't know if you remember the time when he rescued some endangered cranes. Did you see that?
No.
Yeah, there were these cranes that were not flying on their usual migratory path. So they gave Putin an ultralight, and he led them up onto their migratory route in the ultralight, which has to be one of the most stage-managed pieces of political propaganda in history.
It probably wasn't even him, because there's a guy that's quite famous for doing that. So they probably used a guy and said, "Oh, there's Putin." Yeah.
Yeah. And
There was
the
a
other
Hollywood
one,
movie about that. I think
There
he does it
is.
with geese or ducks or something like
That's
that.
right,
But it's
yeah.
an American movie and based on a true story. And
Yeah. So this is what they did. Maybe they saw the movie and thought, well, you know, most Russians probably haven't seen it. We'll get Putin to do it. But the other one is, and the other one, unfortunately, is Asmar al-Assad, who's the wife of Bashar al-Assad. It's been, until very recently, she was a favorite of the lifestyle magazines, including Vogue, and again, they all wrote enthusiastically about, you know, the wonderful Assad home and so on. And there was again like a glossy spread in the magazine. Vogue has removed it from their website, and they've tried to make it impossible to find, but they can't, because Bashar al-Assad himself has a website, and he's got the Vogue article on the website. He's very proud of it. So, you know, again, we live in this world that's infested with all this kind of sneaky image making, and as I say, it all goes back to the Nazis.
It does, and I think you know, because the Allies won the Second World War, then I think we don't realise how much things have been changed and how much propaganda there is, and how things are skewed in our favour. Like you know, like for example, I always think that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I know there's going to be lots of people listening who disagree with me. I think that could be considered a war crime, and that, you know, the people who made the decisions, Harry Truman, you know, if we'd lost the war, if the Allies had lost the war, that would be, you know, a major war crime, and he might have been painted as a kind of Hitler figure if the Germans had won, you know. So I do think we should sometimes remind ourselves that we're living in a world that's everything's been created, the propaganda and the things we believe are being sort of pushed into our minds a little bit, you know, from a certain perspective.
I agree. And then there were other things like the bombing of Dresden and the slightly less talked about firebombing of Hamburg with phosphorus, which was just horrific. I don't think there's really much doubt at all that was a war crime. But again, because we won, we kind of got away with it, you know. Last thing I wanted to mention was Ken Livingstone's expulsion from the British Labour Party. Some listeners no doubt know Livingstone, but for those who don't, he's been a prominent member of Labour for decades. Phil reminded me before, he was the Mayor of London before Boris Johnson, and he's contested the Labour leadership a couple of times. So he's really one of their, you know, towering figures, and kicking him out of the party was a major shock. It happened just, I think, 2 weeks ago now. And the reason why it's happened is because he said two things in an interview which weren't to be said. First, he claimed that Hitler was actually cooperating with the Zionist movement in the 1930s, and that he signed a deal with them to help settle German Jews in Palestine. So, in other words, the Führer didn't want to kill the Jews at that point so much as to deport them, and he was prepared to help. So that's what he claimed. The other thing, that's what Livingston claimed. And the other thing he said, which got him booted, was that the Israel lobby are using anti-Semitism as a smear on anyone who dares to criticize the policies of the current Israeli government. Now, I think there's a couple of things to be said about this. First, I don't think we even need to discuss the second point. That's clear. They are doing it. There's just no way to deny it. The second thing is, I think it's a huge mistake to stifle this discussion because it's politically incorrect, And in fact, there is, if you look into it further, there does seem to be some truth to what Livingston was saying. There's actually some evidence, or there isn't evidence. There's proof. In fact, there was an agreement signed between the National Socialist Party and German Zionist Jews called the Haberer Agreement. And at the time, it was quite a coup. Palestine was controlled by Britain, but under this deal, German Jews could move there, and many of them did, something like 60,000 of them between 1933 and 1938. And the way it worked was, if you were a German Jew and you wanted to emigrate, you could send some of your money to a company called Hanotea, which was a citrus-producing company in Germany. And that money could then be used to buy German goods, which would be shipped to Palestine, and then you could receive the goods when you arrived there. So, look, this isn't proof that Hitler was a nice guy. It's proof that someone in the Nazi Party was thinking clearly, because it actually made the German government a lot of money. They made the equivalent of about $35 million out of this scheme. And as it happened, then it did save quite a few Jewish lives. Now, what Livingston said was basically Hitler went mad in 1938, up to the point where he went mad and started killing Jews. That was the quote. He was willing to cooperate with the Zionists. And the Haberer Agreement, which I've just explained, it did stop in 1938. So, look, it's contested. The exact version of events and the significance of all this stuff and this agreement is certainly contested. But it's a big mistake to not have the discussion, because if you don't, then the only people having the discussion are the nutcases. And if you look on the articles in the press about this, underneath the articles in the comments section, it's just pure flat-out racism. So if you say, we, the political establishment, are not going to have this discussion because it's politically incorrect, then you hand it over to the nut jobs who are just going to go, oh, yes, don't trust the Jews, or whatever they say. And I think it's been a huge error. What do you guys think?
And unfortunately, Ken Livingstone's sort of going to be associated with all of the trolls online as well, all the nutters who are saying all of these things, right?
Using anti-Semitism and political correctness to block out certain things. I mean, that happens a bit with feminism as well. Hillary Clinton's doing that quite regularly. If anyone criticises her, oh, well, you're criticising women then, She's using that a lot in her presidential campaign.
And it's a little bit similar to what we were talking about in your previous article, Anthony, about all of this propaganda, and how all of this stuff kind of infuses our society, stuff that was very prevalent in Nazi Germany 60 odd years ago, and yet we've sort of accepted it so readily and so unconsciously as well. It's like political correctness is kind of seen as so important in so many areas of society, and yet it seems to stifle people's true selves coming out. They're not really allowed to give an opinion, because if they do give an opinion about something, and really Ken Livingstone was just offering an opinion, and behind that opinion he has all of these fairly rational arguments for what he was saying, and yet, like you say, Anthony, if there's no kind of conversation about it, there's no discussion, then it gets handed over to the nut jobs and all those people who are going to condemn Ken Livingstone for saying what he said, as being anti-Semitic. But he wasn't trying to be anti-Semitic. There didn't seem to be any intent to say anything against Jews. It was just a comment sort of based on his own thoughts and his own kind of his own thinking about this entire subject, which now gets pushed into the background so that it never gets any real proper attention.
It certainly does, and it's not only the people who are against him who are now trolling. It's people who have taken what he has said and have used it as a a platform for actual anti-Semitic ideas. So he's said, look, there was this deal in the 30s between Hitler and a group of German Zionists, and they were trying to resettle some Jews in Palestine, right? Piece of historical fact, it seems. And we've gone from that to the government saying, you're not allowed to talk about that. And now the only people talking about it are the people saying, well, yes, we know the Jews are controlling everything, and this is just more evidence, and there was no Holocaust, and la 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 la. It's just, It just made it's taken a reasonable point, which we should take seriously, and made it into like more fuel for the nut jobs, you know. So I think it's just a disaster. And it does show, like, I think political correctness is important up to a certain point, but as you say, it does show that you take it too far and it just backfires on itself.
Yeah, and we did an episode on political correctness. If anyone wants to check it out, go back to some of our past episodes and you'll find it there. I wanted to just move on to a couple of topics, just to sort of wind up today's episode. Just things I came across. Some of them I'm just going to mention, right, and you can, react or not. One is just a video I saw, which I thought was quite interesting. A scientist was doing an experiment where he wanted to show that if you shoot a bullet underwater, it just doesn't go very far. And so he got in a swimming pool and got someone to shoot at him. And sure enough, the bullet only seemed to go about like a couple of meters. But I thought it was quite brave of him. Must have really have had faith in that to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
But that was just something interesting I saw. But there was a couple of too morbid kind of articles I've come across, and we've talked about this stuff before. I'll just quickly mention them, then I'll just finish with the main article I was going to talk about. So another Indian story, from these villages, which just they exasperate me sometimes. But a father raped his daughter because he came back home drunk one night, and she got whipped by the village elders for not mentioning it earlier. So I just thought that, that's just one of those stories that just makes you think, what the hell is going on in those villages, She actually said afterwards, I asked them to beat me because I was at fault. The fault was I did not tell anyone about this at home. I told them my father just held my hand. That was my mistake. So this girl actually thinks they did the right thing, It's just a real shame that, there's backward people coming up with these ideas. And there was in the article, there was lists of other things that these village elders had said, and I won't bother going through them. They're just so ridiculous, the people being punished for when they're completely innocent. And the other one was going back to ISIS. A 7-year-old child was executed by ISIS, apparently. Of course, we have to take some of these stories with a pinch of salt, but apparently ISIS executed a 7-year-old kid because when he was playing football, he swore using God's name in vain. And so he was executed, basically. And just, if it's true, then, you can't get much more barbaric than that either. Just, those were two morbid stories, but I wanted to finish by one that's not so much morbid, but just also sort of gives an indication of the kind of times we're living in. Basically, there was a professor on a plane recently. I think it was a couple of months ago, actually. He was on his way to a maths convention. Anyway, there was a woman sitting next to him and noticed him writing down some equations. So he was just getting ready for this conference. And she called a member of the crew along and said that she was feeling sick. But this was just a ploy so that she could go and have a chat with him and say that she thought there was a terrorist on board because he was writing in Arabic, sitting next to her and acting strangely. And so anyway, the plane was delayed for 2 hours while they hauled this guy off, and he thought that she was sick, so they were questioning him, and he thought that they were questioning him to find out what was wrong with her. But very quickly he realized they were questioning him because they thought he was a terrorist because of what she'd said. And he took them back to the plane and showed them they were just maths equations, basically. And it wasn't even Arabic. And I was mentioning to Phil before the show that, even if it was Arabic, so what? That shouldn't be enough to delay a plane for 2 hours. And in fact, another plane, Southwest Airlines, was delayed because a guy on board, he was actually kicked off for speaking Arabic on a plane.
Oh my God.
And when world leaders say, be vigilant, this is the kind of result, I think. Just wondered what you thought of this woman who saw some equations and thought that was enough to to kick somebody off a plane. Is it a result of the dumbing down of society that people don't realise what an equation is? Is it as a result of ramping up the fear factor? I just wondered what you thought about that.
For me, it's kind of part of, again, what we were talking about earlier, with the political correctness, for example. It's become politically correct to tell people to be wary of terrorism and this sort of thing, despite the fact that the number of people who have died from terrorist attacks is phenomenally small compared to other causes of death. And it's been blown out. It's something that's been blown out of proportion, and no one in the spotlight, in the media spotlight, is really able to talk rationally about terrorism and terrorist attacks, because they can't really sort of say, well, you're very unlikely to die from a terrorist attack, so I wouldn't worry about it. If someone did say that, it would suddenly be in all the newspapers, and people would be condemning that person for saying such a thing. But no, terrorism has got to be just that. It's got to be terror. It's got to strike terror into the hearts of people, which is exactly what the terrorists want. And really, it's just, I think it's become quite an insane thing in my mind.
I agree, and it's not only what the terrorists want, but it's what the political establishment wants as well. That's why if you say, oh look, it's really not that big. I mean, let's focus on the big things. I recently saw a bar chart of the largest causes of death in the US, and look, gun violence and car accidents are right up the top, and terrorism isn't on the graph. So, but if you said that as let's say you're a candidate for one of the major parties in the US, that would be the end of your candidacy, over and done.
Well, Obama actually has said this recently. I don't like Obama. I can't stand him, and I'm certainly not saying that he's a good guy. But he did say something like this, and I think he got chastised for it. I think that's the problem. A little bit of a problem with this Trump phenomenon, that people do what they want to hear. Someone really standing up to groups like ISIS and terrorism, and I can totally understand that. But it is undeniable that terrorism and the idea that you're going to get blown up by a terrorist is just so remote. It's not gonna happen. That has to be drummed home a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, as I said, it is what the political establishment wants you to think. It does suit their purposes, and ironically, as you said, Phil, it's also what the terrorists wants, which means the political establishment and the terrorists want the same thing. Isn't that a bizarre situation to be in?
Yeah, totally.
Well, I mean, conspiracy theorists would say they kind of are the same thing, and maybe even be funding the terrorists, and how closely connected to them, who knows, But anyway, I think we're going to have to wrap it up for today, and but nice speaking to you guys, and we'll have another chat soon.
Yeah, I hope the chat, both of you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure as always. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Scott.
So what did you think of what we had to say? Let me know. Contact us at scottsentinel9@gmail.com or go to www.truthsentinel.co.uk. That's www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Latest news, hot off the press. If you're listening and it's the 9th of July, as you're listening, at 10 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can catch a live broadcast. I'm going to be talking to the guys of End of Days Radio. That's at endofdaysradio.com. And you can join us there, call in and have a chat. And other news, we're also going to be interviewing the Dice Man, Luke Reinhardt, author of the best-selling book that changed some people's lives. It's a book about a guy who throws a dice for everything he does and everything he says, and kind of encourages people to lead a more random life. And he's written a new book as well, which relates to a lot of the topics we discuss on our show. So that'll be in September, but tune in and make sure you don't miss it, because it'll be a classic. Luke Reinhardt rarely gives interviews, so we're very lucky to be able to speak to him. To make sure you don't miss this episode and other episodes, just sign up on our website www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and we'll give you the odd email, not very often, so don't worry, won't give you lots of junk mail. And also subscribe to us on YouTube, Truth Sentinel with Scott. Thank you once again for listening to us today. We really appreciate it, and I hope you join us again for future episodes. Have a great week.